What I want to do right now is take you deep inside the global race to develop the first vaccine. We heard from the government's principal scientific advisor. He spoke about the Indian perspective. But remember, India is just one player, and a lot of the serious action is happening in the United States, in laboratories in the United Kingdom, and in China. So let's now take a look at the global race, and soon on the back of that, I'll be joined by first-rate immunologists, vaccinologists from the United States, from the UK, from key companies in India, and we will try and get a sense of the questions that matter most to you. When will the first vaccine be ready? Who gets access to this vaccine? How soon will you have access to this vaccine? And how safe will that vaccine be given how fast it's been pushed through? Take a look at this India Today special report.
Vaccine.
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 Vaccines.
Everyone wants it. Yet, they realize it's easier said than done. There's a possibility that no safe vaccine is ever developed. HIV, for example, was first identified in 1983. A vaccine is still awaited nearly 4 decades later.
Vaccine or no vaccine, we're back. And we're starting the process.
This is by no means guaranteed. I'm going to hand over to Patrick and Chris in a minute because they know a huge amount about vaccines. I believe I'm right in saying that even after 18 years, we still don't have a vaccine for SARS.
This virus may become just another endemic virus in our communities, and this virus may never go away. I don't think anyone can predict when or if this disease will disappear.
As the desperate hunt for a COVID vaccine is caught between hope and skepticism, wild swings are happening in the global financial markets. Early data on research by drug companies has lifted their stocks up. Sample this activity on Wall Street late last month. Shares of US drug maker Gilead Sciences went down by 5.3%. This after the WHO posted early results from a Chinese study which found the company's experimental drug ineffective in COVID treatment. The World Health Organization removed the summary findings from its portal, saying it was published accidentally, but the damage was done.
Remdesivir has a clear-cut, significant positive effect in diminishing the time to recovery. Although a 31% improvement doesn't seem like a knockout 100%, it is a very important proof of concept. Because what it is proven is that a drug can block this virus.
After America's top infectious diseases expert, Anthony Fauci, gave a positive feedback on remdesivir from another initial trial, a week later, Gilead's shares jumped 8.1%. And when US biotech company Moderna announced promising results from a small trial of its coronavirus vaccine this month, its stock price jumped as much as 30%. The drug maker provided no details, charts, or graphs to back up its claims. The competition is intense, the field crowded. A global race is underway.
Today I want to update you on the next stage of this momentous medical initiative. It's called Operation Warp Speed. That means big and it means fast. A massive scientific, industrial, and logistical endeavor unlike anything our country has seen since the Manhattan Project. Its objective is to finish developing and then to manufacture and distribute a proven coronavirus vaccine as fast as possible.
Of 124 recorded attempts to make a COVID shot, 10 are at the human trial stage. Of them, 5 are from China alone. The remainder from the US, the UK and the other countries. It normally takes years or a decade to develop a vaccine that is safe and effective. Almost all are trying to compress the process in this pandemic. Competition is healthy so long as the potential successes are shared with the world. But then there are fears. Safe solution might get caught in the cross currents of trade war, nationalistic sentiments and profit motives. Bureau Report, India Today.
Since there is so much fake news and misinformation around vaccination and around the COVID-19 vaccine, we thought let's set up a big panel of really top Indian and international experts to get a sense of where things truly lie. By when will we have a vaccine? Who gets to have the vaccine first? How much will the vaccine cost? What should you expect? What is complete rumor mongering on WhatsApp University, and what are the core facts? I'm privileged to be joined on this broadcast by Adar Poonawala. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Serum Institute, the world's largest vaccine manufacturers. Dr. Stanley Perlman is a professor of microbiology and immunology at the University of Iowa Healthcare. We have Dr. John McCauley. He's the Director of Worldwide Influenza at the Centre for Francis Crick Institute in London. Professor Neil F. Johnson is a professor of physics at the George Washington University in the United States. So welcome to all our guests. And since we've heard from Adar first, I want to go across to the other guests, starting with Professor Neil Johnson, around the one question which I'm sure everyone watching you at this time has in their mind. By when do you believe we will have an effective vaccine against COVID-19? Professor Johnson, let's start with you.
Yeah, that's a hard one to answer, but because it's unprecedented in terms of the number of entities pursuing that goal. So it's very hard to answer, but I do go along with Dr. Fauci's estimates that he made back in January, that it would be a year to 18 months from that period, which then puts it sometime in the middle of next year, at least, that will be then when, in principle, the science is quote unquote done to a level that could mean that it could be rolled out at some level.
Now, why there is confusion, Dr. John McCauley, is because while governments and leaders and doctors in government say it's going to take at least 12 to 18 months, you have enough and more researchers and companies that are currently in trial that seem to be suggesting that they could have a vaccine much earlier, especially the Oxford vaccine project, which seems to suggest that they could be out in the market by October, which is when people start wondering, if this company says they can have a vaccine out by October, why are they being told that they'll have to wait for 12, 18 months?
Well, I think that's an estimate from Oxford of when they would think that their trials were completed and they were able to draw conclusions. Then I suppose production will have started already, but production on a very large scale takes a considerable amount of time. And so when we're looking at the vaccine being first available is not at the same time as when it's generally available. And when there are going to be limited supplies at the beginning of the availability of the vaccine, countries will have to make priorities to prioritize those who would benefit most from the vaccine. So we could start maybe, as we're saying, maybe 12 months from the start. So that would be January time that we'd be thinking of being able to roll it out. But for real rollout, you'd be looking at several months after that.
Dr. Stanley Perlman, there's been a lot of international commentary raising doubts about whether we'll have a vaccine at all. People are hoping that there'll be a vaccine sooner, but many top experts have questioned whether we'll have a stable vaccine in 12 to 18 months as well. Can you explain why is it so complicated to get a vaccine going even in a year and a half, and what could be the potential obstacles?
Yeah, I think that it's probably not physically hard to develop a possible template for a vaccine. And I think that's what the 90 to 100 efforts that are being done now will do readily. The issue will be which one of those vaccines will be immunogenic and which ones are likely to be useful for a long period of time, inducing immunity for a long period of time. Those are the kinds of things we don't know. We don't know if you need antibody responses as well as T-cell responses, which are both important for preventing and clearing a virus infection. The T-cells are what eliminate the infected cells from somebody. So all these things, we don't know what's most important, and these different vaccines may target different parts of the immune response. We don't know which is most important, and since we don't know how long they will last, these responses, it makes it all a little tricky. But I think in terms of physically making a vaccine that we can make in large amounts, that won't be so hard. It'll be with choosing the best one and knowing which one will work for the longest period of time.
Now, Adar Poonawalla, the reality is that many of the recent epidemics didn't see a vaccine come out at all. So we dealt with those infections and there never was a vaccine. So how confident are you that when it comes to COVID-19, because a vaccine is supposed to in some senses be the key that unlocks the door of the world, and then you can walk out and do as you please, how confident are you that we will have a vaccine soon enough?
Well, if you look at the pandemics that have happened in our history, we never had the technology and the will to come together in these kind of global coalitions between innovators, manufacturers, donors, funders, like we've seen in the COVID-19 crisis. So I think that's one of the reasons why I'm very confident that there will be a vaccine. And I completely agree with all the other panelists that we don't know how long it's going to take for a successful vaccine to prove efficacy, how many doses we need. Is it a one-shot, two-dose or two-dose vaccine? And we really don't know the long-term ability of these vaccines to protect us. Now, no one can answer that, and only time will tell where we end up. But I can certainly say that a few million doses will be available, at the end of this year if the Oxford trial succeeds. Of course, as the other panelists mentioned, to go into hundreds of millions of doses and to roll it out to, different countries, different geographies, it's going to take several months after that. So I don't think we can look at a kind of miracle coming about, even in the best case scenario at the end of this year. And that's what we need to manage everyone's expectations.
So let's build on what you're saying, that if in a best case scenario, a few million doses of the COVID-19 vaccine available at the end of the year, that is about 7 billion short of what we actually need. And therefore, Dr. Stanley Perlman, the question will arise, who gets the vaccine first? How do you see the rollout of the vaccine project play out? How do you ensure that those who need the vaccine the most get it? And how do you decide who gets to get the dose first?
Yeah, that's always a tough issue. I think the easiest group is people who are healthcare providers, because they're going to be constantly exposed to the virus and they're going to be able to mount good immune responses. So depending on how the virus is, how immunogenic it is, it's very likely that they will be the same group that have responded in the phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3 trials. What's more difficult is that the populations that seem to be at most risk for getting infected, whether it be the aged or people in nursing homes or people who have underlying medical problems such as diabetes or high blood pressure, they're often the people who respond less well to vaccines. So they're the people we have to protect, but they're also the people for whom the bar of raising a good immune response is higher. So that would be the obvious second group, but with the caveat that we're not sure how well the vaccine will work in that group. And then after that, then you can go down to other populations, people who are very well and older, people who are completely healthy and middle-aged and well otherwise. Children are usually not on the list, but children may turn out to be the carriers of the infection into households. We don't know yet, but that's a possibility.
Professor Neil Johnson, given the fact that more and more trade wars are coming up, how do we ensure that the global vaccine project doesn't become a victim of vaccine nationalism, where leaders like President Trump say, I want an election, I'm going to first take care of my people. I don't particularly care about what happens in India or Africa or anywhere else in Europe. If this is an American company, all the vaccines stay in America first.
That's a fantastic question, because in the end, vaccines need people to take the vaccine, to accept the vaccine. And so what we do in our work is track the human side of the hesitancy, the resistance that's actually remarkably and unfortunately already building up against the idea of a future vaccine maybe coming from another country or from a large pharmaceutical that may make a lot of money. And so this issue of how people accept, which sounds remarkable, because the assumption is that, well, if there's a vaccine, everyone will take it because everyone wants to go outside and resume their normal lives. But that's not the case. Our paper last week in Nature showed that there's this remarkable ecology of resistance that, of course, that already existed to do with negative views of vaccines, but that's almost been supercharged in the case in this year because of the aspects of the speed of the vaccine being produced, the fact that probably, as was said earlier, in the end, vaccines work better on younger people, and yet younger people have fewer symptoms, it seems, of COVID, and yet they're the ones that are going to have to have it. So there's a lot of resistance that we see, remarkable amount of resistance building up, not just in the US, but in other countries where there's
let me build on that, in fact, and show our viewers what's happening in the United States and elsewhere, where an anti-vaccine lobby that's peddling all manner of conspiracies has got active, increasingly vocal, and is not on the fringes. They're becoming more and more prominent and raising serious questions about the future of the vaccine project. Take a look at this report.
A hunt for a vaccine, unprecedented in pace and scale. But the path to a COVID shot is perilous in the face of a fervent anti-vaccine movement. One among the opposing voices is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a nephew of former US President John F. Kennedy, and a fierce critique of Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates. RFK Jr. chairs a non-profit group skeptic about health benefits of vaccines. He is also a leading source behind the claims that the fast-tracked coronavirus vaccine program is loaded with health risks, is profit-driven, and that Gates stands to benefit from it.
You've been properly vaccinated.
So this is just a huge welfare program for the pharmaceutical industry. And Bill Gates is one of the investors as well. And this was the vaccine. This vaccine is critical, Polly, because this is the only chance that anybody has for getting a vaccine ready by January, which is the warp speed timeline. You can't do that with a regular vaccine that goes through the kind of production. That is a very time-consuming enterprise. And they wanted to take a shortcut.
Thank you very much. Tony, please.
RFK Jr. has also sought to discredit top American immunologist Dr. Anthony Fauci. The mainstream scientific community and political leadership have widely rejected his claims as unfounded conspiracy theories. That said, opposition to COVID vaccine programs is growing on social media platforms. One survey suggests a fifth of Americans already expressed their unwillingness to get a potential coronavirus shot. Another study suggests that groups opposing vaccines may be small in size, but their online communications strategy is worryingly effective. According to a research published in the journal Nature this month, followers of anti-vaccination pages are more numerous than pro-vaccination ones, and are more often linked to discussions on other Facebook pages, such as parent associations at schools whose stance on vaccination is undecided. The language is emotive. Vaccine hunters are at work. So far, 115 potential candidates are in various stages of development in different countries. The WHO lists around 8 of them as frontrunners in the trials. A slow approach is not ideal in the pandemic. But anti-vaccination activists allege shots from fast-tracked trials could be dangerous and lead to long-term side effects. They also fear governments will mandate COVID vaccination. On its part, the WHO has sought to allay the fears around safety.
I do want to mention that for some vaccine candidates, we had a bit of a head start in the sense that many of these candidates started their development prior to the emergence of COVID-19. And they began with SARS and they began with MERS. And so some of them are a little bit further along. But it's important that as these vaccines are developed, we ensure that they fit and they meet all of the criteria to be safe and effective. As Mike said, there is absolutely no shortcut to that. So when we say accelerate the development, we mean accelerate this because there's a really urgent need, but that does not mean that we will skip any steps, that anyone will be allowed to skip any steps to ensure that we have a safe and effective vaccine.
With anti-vaccine propaganda spreading far and wide in this social media age, the messaging around eventual COVID shots has to be convincing enough for people to accept them. Bureau Report, India Today.
So how do you deal with all these conspiracies? The suggestion, which is not just being peddled but also being believed by a fair number of people, that this is somehow Bill Gates' conspiracy, that there are billions of dollars to be made, that there was no need for a lockdown at all, and that this is essentially just a pharma conspiracy. So let me put that question, and I want to introduce our panel once again. We've got Dr. Stanley Perlman, Professor of Microbiology and Immunology at the University of Iowa Healthcare. We've got Dr. John Macaulay, Director of Worldwide Influenza Center, Francis Crick Institute in London. We've got Professor Neil Johnson, Professor of Physics at the George Washington University, Nadar Poonawalla, Chief Executive Officer of the Serum. Let me put that question to Stanley Perlman. How do you respond to all these, you've got a smile on your face, but this seems to be, first I dismissed it as being non-substantial and not key to this broadcast, and then when I read up more, I said, hey, there's so many people who seem to be believing this kind of nonsense.
Yeah, so I think this is very hard, and the reason I was smiling is because I'm also a pediatrician, so I've been dealing with this 20 years where people have declined vaccines, and it's a very difficult situation convincing them otherwise, especially now when there's so much internet news and people tend to listen to the news. They follow on the internet the news that they are basically believing in, so they're not open to widespread exposure to other ideas. So the only way that I knew how to do it when I was still seeing patients was to try to talk to individual people on a one-on-one basis, and then as much as you can help the servers who run the internet services, whether it be Google or any of the others, to try to pull out, to not allow false information to be on the internet, and then as much as you can then interact with the people who are anti-vaccination and talk to them as much as possible, because it's really a key issue. This is something that I've been worried about too, that if we have wonderful vaccines, but if people decline to take them and we don't reach a certain amount of herd immunity, then we'll still be in the same situation now as we are now, in a few months as we are now.
Nadar Poonawalla, the motives that drive the anti-vaccine lobby worldwide would be different. In India, for example, we had instances where healthcare workers were going to do COVID tests. People had whipped themselves up into a state of frenzy where they thought these were people who were part of a conspiracy and that data would be stolen, and they refused to be even tested. And that kind of paranoia is also spreading. So this anti-vaccine lobby has different contexts, different motivations, but will be a big headache to think about.
Well, I don't know if you're going to like what I'm going to say, but I'm delighted that the anti-vaccine, the anti-vaxxers think that the COVID vaccine is not going to save them, because as a manufacturer, the load and pressure on me is that much less. And quite frankly, anyone who doesn't want to take a vaccine in a crisis like this, when there's so much science and logic explaining and justifying, how things work and, why it's not going to be harmful but going to protect you. And, we've seen that, how we've reduced childhood mortality with so many vaccines like pneumonia, measles, rotavirus, etc., etc. And if people still don't want to believe and understand that, quite frankly, as a manufacturer, I'm happy, because
no, but that's just as a manufacturer. The reality is, in the global battle, unless everybody takes the vaccine, you don't really, as Stanley Perlman just pointed out, develop herd immunity. So it reduces your burden, certainly, but it doesn't solve the problem.
Well, it will eventually solve part of the problem, which is to cleanse the minds of people who will clearly see that in the vaccinated group, over months to come, you will see that people who haven't taken the vaccine are developing a serious disease. And look, this is of course subject to the vaccine coming about and being very effective, but perhaps it'll be one of the largest studies or trials in effect, which will prove beyond doubt that vaccines are here to protect you, and that will become visible, and perhaps the anti-vaxxers will finally shut up and understand and see firsthand their neighbors who have been protected by a vaccine not getting the disease, and people themselves getting the disease. And I wish and I hope to God that nobody gets the disease, but that's the reality, and that's going to come to light, because anyone who doesn't take a vaccine against this disease is going to get it. We've seen how infectious it is, and herd immunity anyway is going to take years, 3-4 years, maybe longer, to build up when we're talking about the global population of 60-70% getting.
Dr. John Macaulay, how concerned are you about the anti-vaxxers movement? Is this just a passing fad and a migraine that will be over soon, or do you believe that this would be one of the key challenges in the global vaccination project?
Well, I think the anti-vaccine group really do themselves and the public health overall no service. We know that we need to get levels of herd immunity increased to be able to get this particular virus and other viruses under control. The problem that we would have then is that we don't really know what the herd immunity levels precisely would be for this, but I would hazard a guess at about 60 to 70 to 80% immunity is required in the global population to get this epidemic or pandemic under control. And whether or not that's done by vaccination, which is the way to do this quickly, or by infection, and that's a nasty way, not the best way to develop herd immunity. Vaccination would be better. We really do need everybody to engage and actually look at themselves, as just been pointed out. If you start seeing people who are not vaccinated getting severe disease and possibly dying, then, and not seeing that in the vaccinated group, that really ought to get some proper thinking into those who are declining the vaccine.
What fuels a lot of this conspiracy is the idea that there is a pot of gold at the end of the vaccination rainbow. Dr. Stanley Perlman, is there any estimate at all about how much money companies that produce and manufacture the vaccine will make? Because it'll be a monumental project of the kind the world hasn't seen. If 7 billion vaccine doses are indeed to be manufactured, wouldn't pharma companies be laughing all their way back to the bank?
Yeah, so I don't know how much money the companies will make. One thing to consider is that when vaccines have been made in the past, people have made money on them, no question. But there's been a lot of headaches with them because of lawsuits and various other problems with the vaccines that probably were not most of which were not vaccine related. So I don't know the answer. I also don't know, as was mentioned earlier, when you have 100 different vaccines coming on the market, and especially if there's vaccine nationalism, are different vaccines going to be used in different countries? And some of these vaccines will be sold in places where they will not make much money, others where they make more money. So I don't know how it's going to pan out in the end. But I don't think 100 vaccines are being developed and tested mostly for financial reasons. I think it's because mostly people want to help and help prevent any more of this pandemic.
But we've also seen, Adar Poonawalla, and that is the reality, that each time, and there's been so much controversy around this, any information is put out into the public about some forward movement in the vaccine project, the stocks of companies that make the announcement jump some 30%, and scientists are questioning, you haven't disclosed the results, these haven't been peer reviewed, and that you're doing this to drive up the price of your stock. So there is some reality to the fact that this is ultimately also a money game.
You know, Rahul, it's very unfortunate that some of these new companies which we're seeing in the West who are developing these vaccines have had these exponential stocks running up. But that's just Wall Street, you know, with their speculative nature, you know, hyping up what's going to happen, what can happen, and that's what typically Wall Street's doing. We've seen that with the startups, the e-commerce startups, all over India. We've seen billions of dollars being, you know, thrown at that, you know, with the promise of an affordable service or whatnot. Now, having said that, also, if we look at the pricing that the vaccine is going to come out at, it's going to be at $2 or $3 a dose, and even some of the more expensive manufacturers will be compelled to give it at cost or a very affordable price. So the amount of global pressure that will eventually come onto a manufacturer, and I already have that, and as you know, we've always been philanthropic in our pricing, so that's not been an issue. But even if you look at some of the Western manufacturers, I am sure that they'll be compelled to give the product at a very, very affordable price, and that'll be fully, you know, publicly widely known. And I'm sure that's
a lot of the biotech companies, Professor Neil Johnson, are under immense fire for sensationalizing trial results without waiting for proper peer reviews, without waiting for proper authentication, to just put out a press release. Everyone saying that's not how science happens, and that, to my mind, is part of the reason why people believe the worst about some of these pharma companies, that they're in this to make money.
Yes, correct. And you see these narratives not just within the minority group, which is the anti-vax, but also seeping into other communities, parents' associations associated with schools, pet lovers of certain towns, or anyone who has a community, some kind of community presence in social media. They talk about COVID. They talk about these issues. They get hold of pieces of these results, and they're worried. They're worried because it sounds like things are it's science in real time, and we're not used to seeing science in real time. And science in real time, as anyone who's spent any time in the lab knows, has all sorts of dead ends, and that's the nature of science. But this creates the fact that there's science unknowns, which is fine, that's the way science works, creates uncertainty within these communities online, and they turn to each other and develop these narratives and suspicion of the vaccines.
So there are two more questions I want to build on. One, the possibility of side effects. Given how soon these vaccines are being rushed, Dr. John Macaulay, a lot of concern around whether there'll be stable vaccines, because would we have had adequate opportunity to study the long-term side effects, which is why ordinarily it takes up to a dozen or 16 years for a vaccine to hit the market, because they're trying to experiment and see whether there's any long-term side effect.
I mean, that is a problem. The situation with the phase 3 trials that will be going on is that they will be looking as carefully as you can in terms of any side effects of the vaccine. I mean, this presents a problem, and this is the case with any vaccine as far as that's going to be used. And so we can only get this by experience. And then it comes to a benefit versus the cost benefit, the benefits versus the negative effects of the vaccine. And in the situation of a pandemic, we do have to work out, if you have a 1 in 1,000 chance of having a negative result versus 999 chances of having a positive result, we have to work out that in the public health nature of the vaccine, we still need to go ahead and expect and accept that there are risks to vaccines, because this pandemic is not unprecedented. We had a pandemic of a similar magnitude 100 years ago with no vaccine, or no proper vaccine at that time. We do have to make this analysis of what this is a public health problem, and there are individual health things. Apologize about that. Sorry.
Okay, Dr. Stanley Perlman, in conclusion, given the deteriorating nature of the relationship between China and the United States, the two countries which are making the most investment in the vaccine project, is there a fear that this would lead to some kind of vaccine war between countries, between blocs, as opposed to the global need for greater international cooperation, which could mar the speed at which we're able to roll out the vaccine?
Yeah. Well, I think that's certainly a possibility. I think the fact that there's so many vaccines being rolled out, I don't think people will ultimately be able to be denied a vaccine, but whether they'll get the best vaccine as it's defined, because we haven't defined that yet. But I think this is a real issue. This is affecting both the vaccine and the economic recovery from this pandemic. So this global Cold War over economics and tariffs and every other aspect is definitely a bad thing from my point of view.
Well, science and research and development is not breaking news. You can't make it up on the fly. We've been able over the last half an hour to touch upon some deep issues in the global vaccination project, the politics of the vaccination project, and what you should expect outside of everything that WhatsApp University has been flooding into your inbox. For joining me on this special conversation, thank you so much. Deeply appreciate Dr. Stanley Perlman, Dr. John Macaulay, Professor Neil Johnson, and Adar Poonawala for taking out time to be with us on this special conversation. Thank you. So there you go. Next time you send me or anyone else a forwarded message about vaccine kab aane wala hai, I hope you can keep some of the answers you just heard from real experts in your mind. It's not coming in a hurry, and even when it does, there will be many complications that you'll need to navigate before you or I get the vaccine. And knowing the manufacturer of the vaccine isn't necessarily going to make your life easier. Hello everyone, this is Rahul Kanwal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.